So welcome to the Margin Business Digital Entrepreneur podcast. In today's episode, we got Bill Flynn. And Bill is the CEO of Catalyst Growth Advisors. So I think Bill can tell us best what he's exactly doing and how he got there to being a multi-certified business growth coach, a business advisor, a best-selling author. So he has more than 25 years under his belt. So I'm sure we can learn a lot from Bill in this podcast, and I'm really looking forward for your advice, Bill. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Great, sure. I'm happy to share. I have learned a lot, and mostly by making mistakes. So I'm happy to share any of that, so your listeners can make their own mistakes and maybe avoid some of mine. So I've sort of had two arcs to my career, Omar. I started off in e-commerce on the sales side in 1995, as we sort of discussed off air, and stayed in the startup world mostly for about 25 years. So I've done 10 startups over those 25 years, all in high tech, all in the Boston area. A decent track record. I'm either 5 for 10 or 5 for 7, depending on how you decide my contribution. But either way, that's a decent track record. I wish I could say I was independently wealthy, but I've helped make a number of other people wealthy. But I still have to work for a living. So I'm still doing really now the second part of my career, which is I'm a growth coach and a one-on-one executive coach. So I work with the C-suite, and I work with the leadership team. My primary business is that I teach them a growth framework that helps them to, as I say in my materials, sort of take the guesswork out of growth. What I've found is that most businesses fail or struggle for preventable reasons, and I help take what I've learned over the last really 30 years and really in the last 5 or 7 focused on helping them to put together a framework that gives them the best chance to succeed as a business, really focusing on 3 areas, which is the team aspect of it, which includes obviously individuals and culture in general. Strategy and execution are really 2 sides to the same coin, and how to really work that as efficiently and effectively as possible. And then using cash as your primary financial growth metric, measuring the business primarily on how you're generating cash. Because as we all know, if you want to grow as a business, it costs you money, and typically you have to spend in front of the growth. So that's sort of been the 2 arcs of my career. You did mention I do have a book. I jokingly say I'm an accidental author. I'm not a writer by trade. I write to learn more than anything, but I do have a book that some other third parties helped me with. I'm actually been involved in 2 books, one of my own, and I contributed to another book that also was best-selling, at least in Amazon's world.
Oh,
so
wow!
That's sort of the high level.
Okay. Sounds very, very interesting. Let's go to the 95 series of the e-commerce. This is something I had a few days. I had actually 2 guests like in the last 2 months. One as well just spoke last week. He from Germany, and he started selling in 95 as well, and was selling to the US actually, which is very, very something unlikely what I heard of in 95, selling to the US, because most of the people were importing from the US into the European Union, because obviously it was advanced stuff, food, anything that the technical stuff that is not in the European Union would be already obviously in the US. So it was really interesting because obviously this time frame of 95 is, it's the beginning of the internet. It's the beginning of everything actually. So please tell us a little bit, how did you got there? I mean, how did you get to selling? Or I mean, Amazon was for me, it was like Amazon. Okay, I can buy stuff there, but I never thought about selling it, especially not in 95. So please tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I actually started selling in 1987. Was my first sales job. It was a startup, or at least it was a tech company. It was relatively old. I never know when you can stop calling startups. I usually say once you get through the product market fit knothole, you're kind of not a startup anymore. Now you're a scale up, but however you want to do that. So in 95, as many of us know, the World Wide Web was born. So the internet was around since the 60s.
Yes.
The World Wide Web was started in 94 when Mozilla, which was the first browser, sort of made sense of all these numbers that were used to roam around the internet. Um, and I started with a company, and I was one of the first 8 salespeople for this company called Open Market. We were called the Netscape of the East, for those of you who know who Netscape is.
I still
They're
remember, yeah.
yeah, yeah, they're not really around anymore, but they had sort of the first really commercially available browser in large things. They also did some web servers and other stuff at the time. And we were one of those companies that should never have gone public and did, and we were worth billions of dollars when we only had millions of dollars in revenue. It was a crazy time um, in the 90s before the dot-com crash in the early
Yeah.
2000s. So I was selling an e-commerce engine, which was basically your ability to take some software and put it on your premises so you could sell. And it was, stuff that we take for granted today um, is, having a shopping cart was a big deal, right? And being able to do that and being able to collect money.
Yeah.
That was not a foregone conclusion, in a way that that made people comfortable, etc. And there were lots of other things in terms of security, and SSL was born then, and public and private key encryption, all these things that just sort of happened today. Um, we were really the first company to do that at the time. I don't think open market is really around anymore. I know it was bought once or twice, over the after I left, and other businesses, and now we've morphed into like the Shopify's and other folks that make it even easier. This sort of third or fourth generation of e-commerce engine, super super simple. We were selling things for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we'd have to then sell you, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of consulting services to make it work. Now you whatever pay Shopify, whatever, the $1,000 a month and or less, and you can sell stuff. That's all the same. So that's sort of where I started. And it was a lot of fun. The internet was brand new, and it was really heady times. So I definitely enjoyed it.
I can imagine, so 95, then 2000s, the dot-com crash. I know, I mean, I was hit by it myself. Then we move on 2005, and then we go into the real e-commerce 2010. I guess by then you were already out of the e-commerce, right?
Yeah, so I sort of moved. I did my first real startup, I guess, ish, was speech recognition, which kind of turned into Siri, or at least the first versions of Siri, and then e-commerce, and then I
Wow.
went into what's called affiliate marketing, which
Yeah.
is affiliate marketing and SaaS.
Yes.
It wasn't even called SaaS then; it was called an ASP.
Yeah,
Um,
ASP. Yeah, it was even a
ASP
company at
was,
that time. Yeah.
yeah, that's what we called SaaS at the time. This I even forget what the A stands for, but I think it was sort of a service provider. We were a third party that came in and and allowed you the ability to do affiliate marketing, which is really to collect money, make offers to people, etc., and those links, and just automate that whole process. We were sort of the plumbing behind that. SaaS didn't come along for many years after that, and then I went to online database backup,
Okay.
which again now is just sort of taken for granted, but at the time, 2005 when I was there, it was new. And then I moved to really then to mobile, which was
Oh,
starting
as
to come
well.
around in 2012, right? So we're still in that realm. It's sort of all this technology stuff. So I did a couple of mobile things as well. And in 2015 is when I transitioned to what I do now, which is I work for myself. I'm a business of really one, with a lot of people supporting me on either side, and I coach leadership teams and or leaders to be
Okay.
the best versions of themselves as an organization or as an individual contributor.
Okay, that would be as well my next question, because is the coaching for teams? So are you going physically there, or is it like one-on-one, you really coaching people, or do you do a mix out of it?
I do a little of both. So my primary business is through teams, and for most of them, I am traveling to them. COVID
Okay.
did everything online. I did everything remotely with tools like Zoom and Mural and others. But I think there's none of my customers now do that remotely. Um, and most of them I physically go to their offices, or I have some companies that are completely remote. So I might meet them in a part of the country. I do have one client that is based here in the U.S. and most of their other employees are worldwide. So we do that, but that's not my main the way I do things
Okay.
typically.
Okay. Understand. So let's go a little bit deeper into coaching and maybe some questions which most of the people would have. I would guess is burnout. Burnout is something, especially in COVID when we have worked a lot, and it's. I'm happy. I'm not personally like affected, but I think it's a lot of people, especially in our domain, which are working with online and going rarely out, or being a little bit too much at home. Maybe they have this feeling in them. Maybe we can talk about this. How would you, for example, approach somebody who coming to you straight away as a CEO of a company and saying, listen, I think I'm burned out. What I can do? Is this as well questions you would address, and how you can approach that problem, and what would be the steps to work towards with that person in these sessions, for example?
Yeah. So I don't have a ton of folks because most of my folks are in C-suite, um, and either they wouldn't admit burnout or they don't see it that way, and they have much more control over their time than people who are not at that level. Um, but I would tell you how I would approach it, which is how I approach it with anyone. Is what I've found is that most of the work that we do does not have the same impact as a few things that we do really well. And the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule really applies to an individual role, to a team's contribution, to an organization's contribution to its customers. Most of your business, if you go through and sort of analyze your business from a profitability standpoint, where you're really working with customers that get you and you get them, and you work well together, most of 80% of your profits come from 20 or 10% of your customers. And so not all customers are the same. And if you just do the mathematical version of that, to business, if the 80-20 rule applies, that means your customer that's at that level drives 16 times more profit into your business than the rest. So finding and getting one more of those is the equivalent of getting 16 more. And I think that applies also to your role and what you do. So what I do is I help people boil down and have them do two things, which is what are the high value things that you do on a regular basis? And do you love doing them? Right? Whether you're an individual contributor, a team leader, or leaders of teams, whatever it might be, it all applies to the same. And what you want to be doing is you want to be doing the high value stuff as often as possible if you love it. If you don't love it, then you have to figure out, am I in the right role? Or can I move some of these things that I don't love off to my team members so the team is still contributing to it? But what I find is most people do work that doesn't contribute as it should. So what I try to do is get them, not at the individual contributor role, but as you're a team leader, I say you need to fire yourself as much from the day to day and focus more on the future of the team or the future of the organization. And that's where you should spend most of your time, because then you'll find that, I did this exercise with one of my clients. They weren't very large, but they had 4 or 5 different types of businesses. They just sort of organically created over the years. And I just did a really simple exercise with the CEO and her team. And I said, okay, let's look at each of these businesses. We put them on like a sheet of paper, named them. And I said, okay, how much revenue does each contribute to the overall revenue? And then how much profit or negative profit does each of these things contribute to the business? And they found out that 3 out of the 5 businesses were actually taking money away from the business. So the other ones were having to make this up. And especially one of the businesses they really liked doing because it felt good. It was sort of mission oriented, but it wasn't something that was contributing. And I said, well, can we find a way for it to be a profitable business? And they looked at it over a few months. They said, we really can't. So they decided, which was not a happy decision. They didn't want to do it, but from a business perspective, they shut that business down because they couldn't figure out how to do it, and they let a bunch of people down. But in the end, it was draining on their resources. And I think that's why people get burned out. Is we don't get burned out because we work a lot. We get burned out because we do things that drain our energy. Like if you might have a few things that you love to do, you could probably be doing them for hours and not even realize hours have passed, and you might feel drain, energy, because you're a human being and you need to sleep, 8 hours a day. But from an energy perspective, it actually gives you energy. So you want to be doing more and more of those things and less of the things that drain energy. That's what leads to burnout, in my opinion, and some of the research that I've done. So that's what I do when I work with folks on burnout, is we just try to figure out those things. And then they decide, if they can't find a way to do less of the things that they really don't enjoy and drain them, then they might need to go somewhere else and find
Yeah.
either somewhere else in the organization or to some other organization.
I really like the approach, and I really like the mindset behind it, because it comes from experience, obviously, and it comes from years of seeing these situations and analyzing them. From what I understand, it's as well, you cannot just go on a professional basis with that person, for example. You will have to, or with the team, you will have to personally, as well, get into personal, because at that level, when we are leaders in a company, and the team as well as high level position, we don't talk anymore about just like every day, you go to job and just be 8 hours there. No, it's really like crossing the personal life and the business life as well. So you need to have an approach on both. Is that difficult to differentiate for you? Because for me personally, for example, or with other people I spoke with, everything goes hand in hand. There's almost no more it's always an overlapping time, when you sleep or when you wake up, or it's always there. So
Agreed.
what do you think about that, and how do you approach that with the persons, because you need to go as well personal. So this is as well difficult, because once we hit the personal, obviously everyone is different.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, and I think COVID was something there. Is it affected everyone differently, right? There were almost sort of three buckets where people were. It was like, yeah, it's a thing, but they weren't really that worried about it. It didn't really affect them that much day to day. There were some people who knew others who were having trouble or really were affected by it, and that affected them somewhat. And then there were people who had affected them directly, either them or someone in their circle. So what I say to folks is, you don't have to become friends. If you're a team leader, you don't need to be friends with people. But we bring our whole selves to work. And while we'd love to compartmentalize, and some are better than others at that, it's really difficult to do that. So understanding them, and by the way, them understanding you, and seeing everyone as a human being, and presenting yourself as a human being goes a great way to helping your team feel better about things, right? There's this term called psychological safety that Amy Edmondson coined a number of years ago. And that's really, I think, boils down to that you especially as a team leader, demonstrate your humanness, right? And in my book, I say you have to get really comfortable with, I don't know, I'm sorry, and I need help, because it demonstrates to your team that you're not perfect. And so they don't need to be perfect. And if there are issues going on in their personal life, they should feel comfortable sharing that with you, because it will affect their work, right? It may be affecting their sleep. It may be affecting their mood, whatever it might be. And I'm not saying that people can just do whatever they want and just blame it on something else. You still have to be understanding that you have a ripple effect to other parts of your team, but understanding that and being seen as that human being, um, is super important, right? And so at team leaders, I talk about that a lot with my clients, and a lot of the writing that I do, is that your job as a team leader is to create an environment so people can flourish as much as possible. It's very hard to make an individual well-rounded, but you can work on making a well-rounded team, and you can also create the environment that people feel much more comfortable, and avoid what Simon Sinek calls their second job at work, which is the hiding, lying, and faking, so people don't see what's really going on. And you mentioned sort of work-life balance. I'm a bit of a contrarian. I don't really think there's such thing as work-life balance. You're putting work and life at the same level, and they're not at the same level. It's all life, and life contains a bucket of work, a bucket of friends, a bucket of family, a bucket of faith, a bucket of finance, a bucket of whatever, right? Leisure time. There's all these things, and you're balancing those things in order to have as fulfilling a life as you possibly can have. And we can get into a large conversation. I think that's why we're now seeing people are not wanting to go back to work because they're like, oh
Oh,
wow,
sure.
I can have a better life. I can go to my kid's soccer game and and et cetera, and still get my work done. And I don't have to be in an office and sort of whatever. So that's, I think your comments are well made. Is that seeing people as human beings goes a great way to having a better team and having employees more engaged, et cetera.
Okay, I think really, really great reply. It's exactly what I'm actually thinking. But I cannot express this in words. But it's definitely the great direction. You have as well mentioned the book, but before we go there, I just wanted to ask you a question. What is, because I asked you the question, but the last 20 minutes, but what is your superpower actually, in your own words?
Yeah, I know. And superpower, it just, I understand what you're saying. I find it difficult to answer questions like this because it sounds like this sort of there's this self-fulfilling, indulging
Yes,
arrogance.
yes, I know what you mean, but it's
Um,
like, let's maybe we rephrase it,
yeah, yeah,
or we say, what are you best in? What is your
understood. Yeah,
number
yeah.
your number?
So I'm a bit of a neuroscience geek, and I think we all have a quote unquote
Neuroscience.
superpower or set of superpowers. These are things that either in growing up or we just have genetically, right? It's just part of our DNA already. It's hard to know, is it nature, nurture, whatever. But there are these things that we generally have gravitated towards in our lives, and we get better and better and better at it. We love to do. Um, so when I get asked a question like this, I say, my brain seems to like puzzles. And I think that's why I gravitated towards liking startups, because startup is just a big puzzle, and I find that stuff fascinating, and I do puzzles on my phone. I get the New York Times app, and I'm doing crossword puzzles and Wordle and other things, and it's just something that I enjoy doing. I think coaching is a different kind of puzzle as well, and really it's me more sort of helping them assemble their own puzzle and sort of being a guide to it, not knowing the answers and not really wanting to, it's not my job to know the answers. My job is to ask really great questions and help you come up with the best answers and validate them and modify them as you go. So I think that would be my answer to your question, which is this: my brain seems
Yeah.
to do a relatively good job at taking the complex and making it and distilling it down to its essential parts, and then articulating that, which fit into
Okay.
a larger puzzle, if you will.
Okay, I understand. So because you mentioned neuroscience,
Yeah.
um, neuroscience, it came directly in my mind. Come Uberman. I'm sure you know Uberman.
I know his name. I don't know much about
Uberman
him.
Labs. Uberman Labs is a company, or he is the head of the company, and
Yep.
he has this funny story from. We can go very deep with this, but he has this funny story from his childhood coming through while he trying to understand the brain. That's why you brought me on the neuroscience side, and I really you're really into it. Does your book as well, coming to your book now, does your book as well touch down on the neuroscience side, or
Absolutely.
what is the main focus in your book? And I will as well put the book afterwards under
Yeah.
the video, so whoever's interested. I love to read the books from my guests always, so I'm
Sure.
sure we'll be reading it, God
Yeah, and
willing.
there's some stuff in there that you mentioned around psychological safety that's in my book. Actually, it's right at the beginning. It's really focusing on a lot of my book is the largest portion of my book is about team and people, and I do have something called gray matters, which are little parts of the book that sort of give the neuroscience side of things. Of why do you do this in a meeting? What happens when you do this, and all that kind of stuff. And um, because at a high level, if you don't understand at least the basics of neuroscience and how the brain works, or at least what we understand how the brain works today, then you're at a deficit because, as I like to say, is we're all like a little crazy, right?
Yeah.
Our brain is where causes us to be emotional, irrational, impulsive beings, because that's what worked when our brain was being used in its previous form before we haven't had a major upgrade in our brain for somewhere between 10 and 50,000 years, according to most folks who study this. So we're basically working with a brain that was on the savannah, and it was in a a tribal arena where you're sort of 150 plus or minus people, and people have different jobs, and you're just really looking to survive the day or the week. And we don't have a lot of those things anymore, but our brain doesn't know that. It sits in the dark silence and takes external and internal information, neurons in our body and external information to make decisions, and it basically works on what it already knows, because it's lazy, because your brain is 3 pounds of mush, but it takes 20% of resources to make it work. So it's done a really good job at being efficient, which then works at deficits because it likes categorizing things, it likes shortcutting things, and because that saves energy. But then that doesn't work for us as human beings. So we as leaders put people in a threat mode, often without even knowing it. And your brain basically works in saying, is this a threat? Are you a friend or a foe? Or is it a threat or not? Am I safe or am I not? Supposedly many times a second, it's going through this assessment just to make sure, is anything going around me okay? Because it's just trying to keep, as I say, the plumbing and scaffolding that's underneath alive. And that's its main job. And it doesn't know any better. It doesn't know that food is plentiful now. It doesn't know that most of the time you're not, there's not a saber-toothed tiger or whatever, a woolly mammoth that's going to run you over or whatever. It doesn't know that. So it takes information and misinterprets it, right? Our brain is working against us more often than it's working for us. So you have to understand that as a leader, because you don't want to inadvertently do things, right? There's a joke that says the 5 most feared words in business are, "Can I give you some feedback?" And that immediately puts our brain into threat mode, believe it or not.
Yeah,
They've done studies because it's a social threat, and our brain can't interpret much between a social threat and a physical threat. So it acts as if it's a physical threat, which means our heart starts pumping, we start sweating, and because our brain is saying, you may need to run at any moment. That's what it's doing, and that's generally how we escaped danger, was we ran away from it, 10 to 50,000 years ago. So I put that in my book, and I say, here's why this works. And here's when you want to put people in a reward state as much as possible, so they're relaxed, and not in threat mode. And threat mode works in the short term, but it doesn't work in the long term. So yes, I definitely put that in my book. And that's why I think neuroscience needs to be woven into, our lives in general, but certainly if you're a team leader, you need to understand that.
I completely agree, because the funny thing is what you just explained with the brain. When I explain it like in a few seconds, I would always say that the brain is trying to keep us out of danger. So the best thing would be like to stay in the bed, to put the blanket on the head, and nothing would ever happen. And the brain is happy, like, okay, you're safe. That's fine. But as soon as you do something uncomfortable, the brain tells you, hey, listen, what are you doing here? That's not, that's not, it should not supposed to be. So I need to protect you. So this is, I mean, what you're saying is what
Exactly.
humans are feeling. And what I'm trying is obviously I work against it, but it's uncomfortable, because all day long you need to do, no, you go in this direction, no, you go in that direction, it's better this time. And maybe it's dangerous, but it doesn't matter. And then the brain shuts up, you just need to tell it to shut up. So there's different, I think when we go very deep into this brain thing, that we can really have some techniques to actually try to avoid what you just said with the feedback, because from some certain people, no matter how good the project you delivered is, they will come back to you and said, "Can I give you some feedback?" It's always like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But there are better ways to do that, right? As well, I tell a longer story, but I won't tell that now unless we have time later. But there's a great, if you can set up standards. So if you have a standards for projects, here's how we run projects, and here's how we know that the projects are running well, and here's how we assess it. You don't actually have to give any feedback. You can say, how do you think that project went? And how close do you think we were to the standard? And if the person's not delusional or whatever, they may already point out things. And so when you come to it and say, oh, we probably could have done a little better here in stage 2 and 4 of the project, then they don't feel the threat, right? And you're giving that opportunity. So you've taken the time to say, here's what we do, and then review the project, let them review it. they're much more likely to be harder on themselves, to be honest with you, than they would be on you. And then you could say in that situation, okay, in stage two, what would you have done differently now that we're outside of what would you do differently next time so that stage two thing doesn't happen?
Sure.
And then, you can let them do it, and you might say, well, that's great, let's do that. Or if there's something you think they missed, you can say, may I add one more? Can I add one more thing? And it's really important to get permission, verbal permission, because it actually tells your brain it's okay. This isn't going to hurt us. It doesn't work every time, but when you actually say, yeah, I'd love to hear that, you're telling your brain again through these signals that this is okay, even though this is new information. It's not going to hurt us, and you're much more willing to accept it. But I'm a big fan of, if someone comes up with a thing and a suggestion, even though it might not be the thing that you want to do, and it's a good thing to do, let them do that, right? Give them autonomy, because it's, at least you're getting progress, right? Perfection is never reached, but progress you can always do. Get a little bit better every day. And it might take 2 or 3 projects to get that stage two to be perfect, or at least to the standard. And if you're patient, you can get them there. But if you try to get them there faster, what happens is they do what's called dissonance, and they'll say yes, but then they won't do anything because it
Yeah.
wasn't their idea to do it, and they're much less likely to do it if it's not their own idea. So your job is to help them again create that environment so they can see, oh, I didn't quite meet the standard, but here's how I can do. And if they can help create the standard, even better, right? Because now it's their own set of things that they said would do, that they should do, and they didn't do it for some reason, right? They missed a checklist or they missed whatever. So the more autonomy you can give to folks, there's this thing called SCARF, which is this reward and threat thing I talked about, which is
Okay.
status, autonomy, certainty, relatedness, and fairness. And that's what our brain is checking on a regular basis. And when we go into threat mode, it's because one of those things have been threatened, or one or more of those things have been put into a negative state, where you want to put it in a positive state, right? You want to take the status out of it as much as possible, which isn't completely doable every time if there's hierarchy,
Yeah.
but as much as you can do. You want to give them as much autonomy as possible, which means give them guidelines so they can do whatever they want inside this thing. Certainty, right? Here's what we're doing, here's what we expect, so they're not guessing. And then make sure they're not in the out group, which is relatedness and fairness. There is argument that there's some sort of fairness DNA thing within us,
Mm-hmm.
that we all have this in us. It hasn't been proven, but there's a theory that we have this fairness gene, so to speak, which we will actually do what's not in our best interest because we think something is unfair. We'll actually go against our own best interests. And there've been plenty of studies. There's a game. Oh, I can't remember the name. But basically, you can give money. You get some money, you can give it to someone else, etc.
Okay. Yeah.
It's been going on for dozens of years, and the name is totally escaping me at this point. I'll get it in a second. And we show that if, even though you get money, which you didn't have before, if you don't think it's really enough and it's not fair, you'll reject the money,
Sure.
which
And
then
pass it on.
allows the other person to not get money either. So you're punishing them for not giving a fair amount, even though you didn't have any, it's extra to you. Like, even if you
Sure.
get $1 out of 10, it's more money than you had going in, but people will give up the dollar to show the other person that they can't get the $9, because they weren't fair and they should be punished for that. So it's an interesting how we work. Again, we're rational. That's not a rational way to do things, but we'll defend it.
Yeah, it's the survival mode of the brain again.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when you speak about like the survival mode and the negative and positive, and what we have been going through as well with the COVID times and everything, there is a lot of entrepreneurs or people who want to be entrepreneurs who need some kind of guidance or some kind of message. What would be your kind of message in this regards for them to encourage, or to encourage somebody who is already at the top and pushing more, or somebody who wants to go into the entrepreneurial game, and just in general a message?
So I break those down into 2 groups. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're starting up, that's a completely different thing than if you're an entrepreneur and you're past that startup stage, right? You're having some predictability in the business. Now you're scaling and you're really working on repeatability and scalability and predictability. 2 different things. So I'll answer both. Startup. I have a number of startup founders who I talk to every now and again, and they ask me sort of what's one piece of advice you would give me, and my advice is always find a problem worth solving and solve it in a way that enough people will pay you enough money to make it happen. Do not fall in love with your idea, and then try to sell people on your idea. Your job isn't to tell people how smart you are and have your idea. Your job is to help solve a problem that people are actually having, and they're having it at such a level that it's something they want to get solved. A lot of entrepreneurs don't do that. They just try to, go and sell their idea, and they're
Sure.
often saying, well, these people just don't get it. I'm like, well, they don't have to get it. They're living their own lives, right? And then the other thing I tell them is don't run out of money while you're doing that, right? Make sure you have enough money to do that, because you don't, again, that puts you in threat mode. When you're always scrambling for money, you're constantly in threat mode, which actually diminishes your ability to be creative and thoughtful, which makes it harder to come up with cool and new ideas.
Sure.
So that's sort of the startup guy. And for the scale up folks, it's what I said already is your job now is not the job you had before. Your job is to fire yourself from the day to day as much as possible and figure out the few things that truly matter to your customers and your teammates, and try to do those as often as possible. And there are a bunch of exercises. I have dozens of exercises I have people go through as teams and individuals to get there. It's not an easy process, and it takes time. And in many cases, you can't fire yourself completely from things because maybe there's no one else to do it. So there may be things that you really don't like doing at all, but you have to do them. But I always encourage you, how much time is it taking you to do that? If you actually took, and how much money do you make an hour, or how much value do you provide to the company in an hour? Would it be better to pay a fraction of that to some other person and have them do it, teach them how to do it, so you can have more time doing other stuff, and then you'll contribute more to the business, so you more than pay for that resource, right? So those are the checks and balances that you have to do for folks. And so for instance, if you're a sales guy and you're doing the whole sales model, it may actually benefit you to hire someone to just set up meetings for you, teach them how to say a few things, call the right people and say, hey, whatever, and have you focus on the farther end of the funnel, or the lower end of the funnel, if you will, depending on how you look at it. Because you can make twice as much money rather than spending a lot of time at the beginning of the funnel generating interest and awareness and qualification, et cetera. That's a very specific example. A CEO obviously has lots of jobs, lots of things that they can do. And your job eventually is to push the decision and the authority for the decision down to where the information is, and teach them how to make those decisions as much as possible themselves, so that you don't have to be pulled into stuff. You really, as a leader, want to make fewer and fewer decisions as the company gets larger and larger, but they're highly impactful decisions, right? They could double or triple or more than that the size of the company if you come up with a really good idea. But you can't come up with an idea if you're doing all the time, right? That's our brain doesn't work that way. We can't focus on one thing, really focus on one thing more than one thing at a time. And I have people say, well, I can hold the baby and cook the food and and be on the phone, and I'm doing three things at the same time. And you're not actually doing three things at the same time. You're on automatic on other stuff, right? And the thing that I say is, hey, if you're driving, how often, like if you're in a strange neighborhood, you're looking for an address, do you turn the radio down? And a lot of people do.
Yes.
That's because it's distracting, right? So they turn it down because their brain is being distracted by that, focusing on the radio, and they can't focus on what they're trying to do. That's what your brain does. A context switch, really, you can be really good at context switching, but you can't focus on one thing at a time. And as a leader, you don't want to be doing that. You want to be focusing on a few things that truly matter.
Wow, this is definitely some valuable content you delivered today. And how can anyone who's really like interested to get in contact with you, where can they contact you, and who wants to get the book? I will put the link into the description, so anyone who listens to this can click on it, can get it, and I will get as well a photo of it. I will put it into the podcast when we upload it. Then we can as well see what you have been writing about, or what's the cover look like. So we have a little bit of an overview over there as well.
Good, great, yeah. So if you want to get in touch with me, the best place is through my website, which is www.catalystgrowthadvisors.com.
Put it here as well.
The book is on there as well. I actually give away my book for free. If you want to download it as a PDF, you can go to Amazon or Audible and download it there as well. And I get
Amazing.
a few bucks every time somebody does that. So I'd love to do that. And so that's probably the best way. My contact info is on there. You can book a meeting with me on there. That's the best place. So it's www.catalystgrowthadvisors.com.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. That was amazing. It was a great conversation. I'm really really happy that we could do this today. And yeah, thank you so much for that. You've given so much value to our audience. And I wish you best of luck. And I'm sure we will speak again in the future.
Great. Happy New Year. Thanks for having me on, Omar.
Thank you.